Good morning, everyone. As introduced, my name is Matt Wilkinson. I work for Met Police. I often get dragged out by Terry to give updates to you all around things going on in the NPCC and more broadly around competitive change. One of the first things I'm going to talk to you today about is the Northern Ireland stat fee. Most of you will be aware that when we pushed forward with the stat fee increase with the Home Office in 2023, it didn't affect Northern Ireland. They're a devolved administration, so effectively they set their own rules, much the same as Scotland did as well. Unfortunately for us, the stat fees in Northern Ireland couldn't be progressed because they had no working government. They were in a bit of a stalemate. So we had worked with PSNI to make sure that the Department of Justice out there were aware that there was a need to move forward with some form of statutory change in Northern Ireland as and when they could. Interestingly, they were actually able to administratively increase stat fees in relation to what we would call Section 99 Road Traffic Regulation Act recoveries. They're your obstruction, danger, road traffic collisions. So there wasn't actually an increase in those, which they could do without having ministerial backing. But those around no insurance and forced court debts, etc., they fell basically under the administration of some form of government process. Now, positively, PSNI were on board with that, and they were working very hard, so I need to make clear that this wasn't just the case of PSNI turned a blind eye to it. John Sinclair, who's an acting inspector over at PSNI, had been working very hard to lobby the Department of Justice to make sure that as soon as they were capable, they would actually instigate a consultation on behalf of the Recovery Operators out in Northern Ireland. So I'm pleased to announce that that's exactly what's happened. So as of February, we had a working government out in Northern Ireland, and the DOJ have stuck to their promises, and they actually moved forward with a consultation. We were notified directly from them back in April to say that there was the consultation, and would the NPCC like to form a response. We were conscious that, unlike in England and Wales and Scotland, where we have multiple forces, this affected PSNI in isolation, so we moved forward and asked them whether or not they would actually like us to respond on their behalf. So we have actually done that. We've basically worked with PSNI, we've taken on board their comments, and we've compiled a response for them and in collaboration with them on behalf of them and yourselves to set out what we consider to be salient issues around stat fee increases in Northern Ireland, which have some slight differences to what we're seeing here as well. So for anyone who's actually seen the consultation, it's currently running from the 18th of April to the 13th of June. We've passed on that notification to Avro, although I spoke to Mick earlier on and he actually said, I think you've been notified beforehand, haven't you, as to the consultation, so there will be a formal response from the industry from Avro. So there were a couple of options in the paper itself. There was an option that they do nothing. I think that's kind of a typical Home Office thing they have to put on paper. Clearly we've not backed that. Option 2 was then to move forward with some form of statutory rise. Of course, they normally move in parity with England and Wales. Frankly, for them it's quite easy because we've done the work for them in advance. So that's generally where they went. So the increases they saw to the other administrative increases were 28%. So that's what they got, and that's the proposal at the moment. They're ultimately looking to move forward with the 28% increase to move parity with England, Wales and Scotland. We've actually said we don't think that's right. That 28% figure was based on 18 months, 2 years ago. Inflation has increased. In terms of how they've actually set out the question, they've said, should it increase by inflation? So we've gone back and said, well, if we actually increase it by inflation as it stands now, we went back to the Home Office and asked them how they'd calculated the inflationary increase of 28%. And it was some really overly complicated deflector GDP kind of calculation. But effectively, we compiled our own calculation, which we submitted on the paper, and we're seeing that as of now, it's about 42.9%. So the change from 2008 to 2024 in April is about a 42.9% increase in inflation. So we've said that that is the level that they should be looking at, because we think that's the fair level. So we're not looking for them to consider any other factors in how the vehicles are recovered or any of the risks. That's purely based on inflation. And that's a figure that we're obviously going back to the Home Office with as well, as part of consideration for the 2025 increases. Of course, that would be the difference between 28% and 42.9% instead of just another 42.9% increase. So that's the proposal we've put forward at the moment. In addition to that, we have listed other factors we'd like them to consider. So we've got the inflationary increase, so the pressure there that's on the industry and the police services as well. Then we've highlighted the significant concerns, as has been mentioned in numerous forums over the last year or so around electric vehicles and the increased risk and costs that everyone's bearing at the moment to try and deal with that and the uncertainty. We've asked them to link in with the Home Office as part of that holistic review that's currently being undertaken to make sure that they can keep parity with it. We then asked them to consider the very specific and special operating circumstances that the recovery operators out in Northern Ireland in particular have to operate under. They operate under a heightened domestic terrorist threat risk, and with that comes additional costs around security that many of us in the United Kingdom otherwise don't have to deal with. So we've asked them to consider that in isolation from England and Wales. And then, much as we did with the review in this country, we asked as well if they could implement some form of stipulated and mandated regular review of the fees, so we don't end up back in a position where there's the promise of a review and then we're 15 years down the line without one. So that's the case that we've put forward. Of course, until the review is completed, like I said, I think that's back in June. There's obviously going to be no feedback from us. Avro won't have had feedback either. They'll then take on board all that consultation response and then obviously offer some consultation outcome. They may link back in with the industry, I don't know. It depends on some of the questions that they may have. My gut feeling is they're probably just going to push for the 28% increase because it's the easier thing, and then they'll be guided by the Home Office in England and Wales and the reforms that we're looking forward to push in 2025. While I touch on that, I will mention that because that's probably more of interest to anyone in England and Wales and Scotland at the moment. So when the Home Office did the last snap fee increase in April, there was a promise, although it wasn't mandated in legislation, that they would look again at snap fees in 2025. I can confirm that they are actively, as we speak, engaging with the NPCC, and we are looking at snap fee increases for 2025. That's the early conversations that have happened at the moment. And they have also started working on some preliminary work around electric vehicles as well. That's a much harder topic to deal with. So the snap fees that we see increases on, the business case for those snap fee increases was set many years ago. So the Home Office doesn't need to revisit the business case, they just need to look at the fee values normally in relation to inflation. The difference we're going to have with the EVs is we're asking them to consider a whole different matrix or charging regime. And it's not simply a case that we provide them with anecdotal information and our concerns. We need to back that up with facts and figures. So there's an ask for me. As much as we go back to the police operators and say to ourselves, what data can the police provide to the Home Office? And we have challenges ourselves around that. I need to say to yourselves, and particularly on Avro, who might be compiling a response, you need to start recording information about electric vehicle recoveries. That's facts and figures. How many you're getting, how many are damaged, what risks you're exposed to, incidents, the costs of those incidents, because that is everything that the Home Office is going to need to write at a ministerial level to get back into a fee increase. As to how we then work that fee increase to something that's fair and reasonable for the public, yourselves and the police, is a different matter, but first we need to get that data together. So if you're not doing already, please start collecting that data yourselves. You're going to help us and help yourselves if you're all actively engaged in collecting that information. I know it's been spoken about a few times, Richard's mentioned it at different conferences as well. We all need to be pushing to collect that data. It's really, really important. What would be even better is data standards and quality. If we all go out and collect this data in a fragmented fashion, in our own formats, it makes it very difficult to then collate that and actually infer anything from it. So I would encourage you all as an industry to maybe get together and work out how you want to capture this data so that going forward it's consistent, and then we can take that on board alongside our representatives at the Home Office, and we can use that as a collaborative piece of information to drive that reform and change. So that's pretty much the update on the snap fee side. It's kind of sit back and wait for the moment, but as soon as we have had more meaningful meetings with the Home Office around the EV and the next snap fee increase changes in 2005, I rest assured you will be updated and advised as to the progress on those, and if there are any data requests as well, we will push those through Avro and through the NPCC forum as well.
I said there's no Q&As, but I want, just for the record, this is the question, is that last year in June, I wrote to the Department of Justice and PSNI, as you well know. I got a very laboured response and I came running to you guys. And just for the record, the work that Matt, Terry and the NPCC have put in collaborating with them, taking this over from me and pushing it forward is brilliant. And it just goes to show what working as an industry together, collaborating, giving them the information that they need so that they can help us, they're now going to help Northern Ireland, and it's a
Richard just took that away from me, because I was going to say this. That short presentation certainly demonstrates the amount of effort that the MPA and the MPCC put in on behalf of the industry. So on that small bit for Northern Ireland, which came about from a phone call to Richard while he was on holiday, and Richard picked up and reacted on it, and that's where it's ended up. And I'm sure the Northern Ireland operators are very grateful for that. Imagine the amount of work that goes into it when they're doing it on the whole piece for the UK. It's huge. And thank you. Hopefully now.
Yeah, I'll let you know on it. So, good morning everybody. Derek done a very kind introduction for me. Mick Burke. I'm temporarily back at the Met for a few months, helping the team out. Obviously, after me leaving, a number of people, there was lateral moves within the organisation and some promotions. So it left Matt and the team short at a period where there's a lot of work going on with commercial contracts. It was nice to go back and see how the team's progressed in the last year, and they're doing a fantastic job, I'm pleased to say. And I suppose the nicer part for me coming back on an ad hoc basis is I've got no people responsibility. So I'm quite happy to attend the sites and not have to deal with the people issue, which can always be a challenge on a daily basis. Incident I want to refer to, obviously, as I said, I don't mind going into the pounds now because everybody leaves me alone, so I can come in, get on with work. And I was there on the 28th of May for a meeting, and about 8:50, I was just due to go into a meeting about 9 AM that morning. I nipped outside. For those that don't know Matt very well, he's a keen car enthusiast, and Matt was about to park up in a bay just beside where we keep our scrap vehicles. And I think there's a few people found out Matt's very proud of his vehicles, but at the last minute he decided to move his car away from the scrap bay and parked over the other side. So I don't know, did he have some foresight of events that were going to unfold that morning? And the other point I suppose I'd like to make is that I stood up here a year ago talking about electric vehicles, electric vehicle storage, electric vehicle training. Walked away quite content with what I felt we'd done in the Met, and feeling quite prepared that if we did have an event that occurred, we'd be quite easy to deal with it. How wrong I was, I hasten to add. So on the 28th, I'm going to run the videos first and then I'll talk about. All I'd say is I am limited in regards to what I can share because it's still under investigation, but Richard and Derek were very keen that we share a brief overview for the industry to ensure that everybody out there is aware. And the incident I'm referring to started with one of these little e-scooters. That video is just when the fire was starting, and that was just one e-scooter on a truck. And I'll explain some more on it.
You see the road cars on the top, nicely tanked, scooters on the bottom.
So the vehicle had already been loaded at that point, so it's a transporter come in to pick up our disposal load from the morning. There were 3 cars on top, there were 14 bikes, 2 e-scooters and an e-bike, and it was the last e-scooter that had been loaded. The e-scooter had been stored with us for 14 to 18 days, just beforehand. The e-scooter itself was quite heavily modified. You're probably finding some of these coming in Japan's as well. It wasn't like the line dot or tier ones we see pushed out to part of the trial schemes that you can rent. This was quite a monstrous sized thing, and the battery packs were quite significant. And there was no indication beforehand in the whole time that e-scooter had been in with our car pound of any issue at all. It was literally moved out of our quarantine area in the car pound, moved across to the back of the vehicle and then loaded by the contractor. And as soon as it was loaded, it combusted.
So that's when it had taken hold a little further. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Perivale site, it's about just over 8 acres in size. When the site opened, I was responsible for the layout of the site. So luckily, where we load and unload the vehicles going for either disposal or auction we put it in a certain, on the perimeter of the site to keep it away. That day we probably had about 870 vehicles in storage on the site. But, you know, as Matt said, the fire commenced very quickly.
How far into it was that?
That was only a couple of minutes. It really.
Fire service arrived within about 10 minutes.
Fire service were on site in 10 minutes. So what happened really was, in the first instance, we saw a plume of smoke. The two drivers, there was two transporters loading up at the time. They ran to get a fire extinguisher. But by the time they came back, the gases that were emitted from the e-scooter, they became overcome. So within 3 minutes, you know, we quickly realised what was going on, and we instructed them to move away, because I would say the gases coming out of that continued for a total of 3 minutes, and we were amazed at the area that that plume of gases took up. So they were overcome by fumes at times. We managed to get the two guys back. As Matt said, we had 20 vehicles on that truck, 3 scooters, 3 cars, 14 motorcycles and mopeds. And obviously, as you can see, the ferocity of the fire impacted what we thought at first was about another 65 vehicles, but subsequently there was only 6 vehicles damaged by heat. The important bit and point I'm trying to get across here, I know many of the contractors that undertake work for the police and store vehicles are a lot smaller than 8 acres. And I would imagine, had a fire of that ferocity, you know, gone the way it did, I would have thought that you'd probably have lost your whole premises. And this was a little e-scooter. As I said, it really developed quickly, and it took minutes for the whole thing to ignite. As Matt said, we had initially 3 fire appliances on site. We had 5 ambulance units, although there was 2 drivers overcome with fumes and smoke, and then we had another member of staff that went into shock. The first overview of it really was when we thought this is going wrong, there was a hissing followed by a rapid discharge of gas. And, you know, Matt said it was a modified e-scooter, but nothing exceptional. You know, it was something that you've all dealt with probably, whether it be an e-bike or an e-scooter. We've paid a lot of focus to damaged electric cars and the risks associated with them, but, you know, this was about 20th of the size of some of the batteries you see in the vehicles. Another key thing for everybody, I think, is as the fire developed, we started seeing objects flying through the air, and they were the battery cells from the battery. And post-event, Matt and the team went round, and I would say they projected about 15 metres from the point of the fire. The items were of various weight, and obviously if they'd have hit somebody, it would have been like being hit with a bullet. I can't, you know, we were stunned and shocked by how the batteries started exploding. Subsequently, when the fire picked up, we had another 2 electric, or what, as we call them, private light electric vehicles on the cargo. They started catching on fire, and then they started erupting and doing a similar thing. It's hard to determine where the battery, which thing battery cells came from, but when I say they were flying through the air, you wouldn't have wanted to be within, I would have said, 50 metres of that. We put a cordon in of 100 metres. It took the fire service 45 minutes to extinguish the fire, and there was a number of challenges doing that. I would say the gods were with us in regards to, we were very lucky with the weather. Had there been, you know, a bit more wind blowing, I think we'd have probably lost hundreds of vehicles. I think another part of it is, as Matt touched upon, we had the vehicle for about 16 days in storage. And the process that we follow in the Met, we don't leave the e-scooters exposed to the elements. We store them in facilities to keep them dry. So we've, put a big marquee up and we keep the vehicles inside. The e-scooters were brought out probably about 10 minutes before the driver started loading them up. And, there'd been no sign, no indication of any problems with any of the e-scooters we loaded. So on the surface of it, it looked like a normal day. Team at the pound did their job, followed all the procedures, brought them out. 10 minutes before they were loaded, they went onto the truck. I'm pleased to say that nobody had any long-term, injuries, or they were cleared by the London Ambulance Service within a very short time. Obviously, it's new to us in regards to the focus being very much on electric vehicles, and we were conscious of what we've seen in the media with e-scooters and e-bikes, but obviously we're going to have to change how we do things, and that covers everything from how we recover an e-scooter roadside, how we store it, and how we dispose of it. We've been in contact with our colleagues at the RBR, Mary and the team, to get some advice. We will be issuing some new instructions. We have, as a lot of police forces do, probably moving e-scooters around in police cars or people putting them in vans. I don't think people understand the full risk of it. And that has got to stop. And obviously, we've got a lot of policies and processes, and to include a lot of different agencies in how we do this. I'd ask everybody here today and wider industry to undertake a review of your policies, your processes, your safe systems of working, and your risk assessments around the removal, the storage, the disposal of EVs. I think it's got to cover it from cradle to grave, so to speak. And I cannot emphasise that to everybody enough, because had that been a smaller premises, you wouldn't be operating a business today. I heard conversations last night. I was having a chat with some colleagues about how we store electric vehicles, some of the demands that are put on by the police service about storing forensic vehicles within forensic facilities. You own your premises. Just ensure that you've got the policies, processes and procedures in place, and regardless, you can't put your business at risk, and that needs to be made very, very clear to anybody that tells you otherwise. And I'd just say I'd be happy to support anybody on that if that becomes a problem for you. I hope today, as I said, it's a very short presentation. It just acts as a timely reminder for us all. There is, as I said, we're involved in an investigation which involves the fire service, health and safety executive, our own internal policies and procedures within the Met Police. And I know there's it's our responsibility going forward that we share a lessons learned exercise. We are some way from that, as I hope you all appreciate, but be assured, Terry, who chairs the MPCC, has written to every police force. They've been given an in-depth overview of the occurrence. They've been given an in-depth overview of the associated risks with it, and Terry has also notified the Home Office, Department of Transport and Joe Shiner. So it is to raise awareness for everybody. So I don't know if I missed anything there.
I'm just going to touch off the point about the Environment Agency.
Yeah.
So, most of us will probably be aware that when you have an EV fire, obviously the fire service are going to flood that vehicle with tons and tons of water. We're very fortunate that at Perivale and Charlton we have intercept tanks on site. So effectively we didn't have the complication of that hour's worth, 3 appliances worth of water being an environmental issue. So obviously the fire service are obliged to contact the Environment Agency if they suspect there's been any groundwater contamination. Unfortunately for us that wasn't an issue. But
They did initially block the drains, and very quickly a duck pond was built, and the until I spoke to the Chief Fire Officer and said, look, we've got interceptor tanks. Followed up by then, we had to call out the maintenance people to empty the tanks to take the water away. But
if you don't have interceptor tanks and you are storing damaged electric vehicles, you need to consider how you are going to mitigate groundwater runoff and penetration, because that's something the Environment Agency will be coming knocking on your door afterwards. We were just very fortunate.
it was part of the design of that, and I was at the site when we actually fitted the interceptor tanks. I suppose for me, my final thoughts, nobody was injured, which is the key thing for me. I know it was an awful risk. Obviously, a company has lost a transporter. The follow-up to that, it took a day. So, Lantern's Recovery came out. They were responsible for clearing the transporter. Obviously, that morning we had a meeting where we wanted to go through the risk assessments for unloading that vehicle, supporting the top deck because the whole thing had buckled, so a lot of the hydraulic pipes weren't there. So we had a method statement for how we were going to do that. We all had to agree that before that work took place. So that's it from me. I hope you found it valuable in regards to the content, but please, 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 if you do one thing going away from here, just review your policies, processes, procedures, health and safety, risk assessments, because you can never be prepared for that type of event. Thank you. And Matt's just kindly reminded me that we had another fire 2 days ago at Perivale. It was a hybrid vehicle that we'd had in storage for 5 days. Came in as a type of burner, but after 5 days that reignited as well. So we're getting very friendly with the fire incident secretaries. We're on first name terms at the moment. But again, I think like Richard touched upon, landlords and insurance companies are going to start looking at this, and it's only going to end up in one thing. It's going to be a challenge with premises. It's going to be a challenge with those who insure the industry, and it's going to be an expectation. As Matt touched on, Matt and myself met with the Home Office some weeks ago, and we're trying to highlight what the industry has to invest on their premises to store electric vehicles, to recover electric vehicles, to store damaged electric vehicles. It all comes at very great cost, and we thought we have got a good system in place in the Met, but obviously now we're going to have to review that, upgrade it, spend a lot more money. But for you guys, recovery companies that undertake this work for police, that falls on you as well. So please, please, please be mindful of what Richard said about signing contracts when they're expecting you to invest quite substantial amounts of money. So anyway, thank you everybody.